Recording in progress.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us at the webinar of the WVS survey today. Today we have a talk by Professor Dr. Christian Welzel. The topic of his talk is Autocratic Modernity, Psychological Cracks in a Dystopian Model. Everybody knows Chris Welzel, but just a few words about him. Professor Dr. Christian Welzel is Professor of Research of Political Culture at the University in Lüneburg in Germany, and he's also head of the Center for the Study of Democracy. He's also vice president of the WVS Survey Association and a fellow of the German Academy of Sciences Leopoldina. His research focuses on democratization, sociocultural evolution, and the emergence of emancipative values. He is the author of many books and publications. One book is Freedom Rising, Human Empowerment and the Question for Emancipation, which received the 2014 famous Steinhocken Prize. So Chris, the floor is yours. Please give us your presentation. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Christian, for the nice introduction. It's a great pleasure to speak in front of such an exquisite audience. So what I'm presenting is still work in progress, and it's co-authored work. So let me mention my co-authors, who are Leonard Brunkert, Stephen Brigger, and Agnieszka Tuska-Kawa. And we're trying to develop this in two directions. One should be a monograph, which I would see on the horizon in 2 to 3 years from now. And also we are trying to get an ERC synergy grant on this whole idea. So what is the point of departure? The point of departure is so many papers I'm getting to review recently where it is said that China is the quintessential disproval of modernization theory, and especially modernization theory's central claim that there is a tight connection between per capita income and democracy. In other words, to speak with Lipset, who published this famous article in 1959 in the American Political Science Review, the title was Some Social Requisites of Democracy. And I don't know any quote from political science that has been quoted more frequently than this quote: the more well-to-do a nation, the better the chances that it sustains democracy, period, quote end. And I think the income-democracy relationship, correlation, let me say it like this, it's the one most researched topic in political science. If you do a meta-analysis and look how many papers have been published on the democracy-income relationship, either confirming or disconfirming it, the evidence is absolutely mixed. It's the most researched topic in political science, except for one other, which is the democratic peace thesis, which is more in the field of international relations, so that democracies don't fight each other, which is another famous quote from political science. But everything has been done in terms of modeling techniques, cross-panel lagged models, newer techniques, bootstrapping, everything, multiple data imputation to look at democracy-income relationship. And the evidence has remained mixed. Just to give you one swing of the pendulum, in 1997, Adam Przeworski and Limungi published in World Politics a paper under the title Endogenous Democratization. And they said, like, the relationship is spurious, basically speaking, Because what you can tell is, yes, democracies that have a high income level are more likely to survive as democracies and not switching into the other type of system. But there is no indication or evidence that as countries get more affluent under dictatorship, that they are more likely to switch to democracy. So it's basically a stability argument, not a transition argument that you can make about this relationship, income and democracy. Then Karl Bosch and Laura Stokes published 2 years later in the same journal, also in World Politics, a rejoinder and said, no, actually, you did not look right at the data. And if you do the right modeling techniques, you will see that the relationship does exist. And it's robust, reliable. You just also have to take into account time lags and so on and so forth. So there is a venerable and long literature about the income democracy relationship, and all that got lost in this literature is what Lipset originally said about what are the reasons why more affluent countries. So the mechanism, the causality mechanism, what are the reasons why more affluent countries should be more likely to be democracies? There is also an understandable explication why this hasn't been studied, because Lipset was referring to arguments that could not be tested empirically, because at the time, when he published his book, A Political Man, in 1960, and his paper in 1959 in the American Political Science Review, data for testing the argument were not available. But this has changed with the World Value Survey. And the basic arguments are actually it's not a mechanistic relationship. As countries getting richer, they become more likely to be democracies. So there must be some reason behind it. And if you look into the 1959 paper again, it's basically a psychological argument that Lipset is making. As countries becoming more affluent, and it doesn't mean only more affluent, they're becoming more urbanized, more industrialized, they get more occupational diversification. So the workforce is changing in shape tremendously. People are living more densely together. People are exposed to more diversity. People are getting more information, communication, education. So the basic argument was a kind of a psychological argument. The modernization process, in all its complexities, it's just not only about income. In all its complexities, it is changing people's mindsets in a way that makes people more tolerant of diversity. And that means people are also more easy to tolerate a peaceful transition of power to a sort of opposing camp of political force, because it's temporary. It's for 4 years. And this is why we don't want to have King Trump, who reigns at the end of his death. Temporary and peaceful transition of power, and people getting more tolerant about this through the process of modernization. So it's a psychological argument. The mindset of people is changing. And from this point, I got more into the early modernization literature, and there were a couple of authors who were even more outspoken about those psychological effects. One is Daniel Lerner, who published even a year earlier than Lipset, namely in 1958, the book titled The Passing of Traditional Society. And he and Alex Inkeles, who was also coming from a psychological angle to describe what modernization is doing with people. The basic argument was, and there is a term, it's a bit technical and academic, but Russ Dalton used it a lot. And I was always very sympathetic when I read the term the first time. It's cognitive mobilization. Cognitive mobilization. This is the most important aspect of the modernization process. People getting exposed to more information, communication, education, learning. Schooling years are going up, fertility rates are going down. It's from births to brains transition that is happening actually everywhere in the world right now, even though different countries are at different stages in the process, but it's happening everywhere. And this cognitive mobilization capitalizes on the most quintessential, Karl Marx would have called it Gattungsmerkmal, species characteristic, that we have a brain and we are not social insects. We have a brain, and it means we have the capacity, the faculty, the agency to think for ourselves. And any system that engages into education, no matter how dictatorial, if it's not outright indoctrination, like madrasa schools, where people just learn to recite the Quran, but any system that engages into education, that means like get people to serious science training. It will train people to think for themselves. It will train people to come up with creativity, with solutions, asking questions, and not believing or listening only to answers that are already preset. And any system that engages into this will create people who are more capable to think of themselves. This was the modernization argument. And then, when people have learned to think of themselves, they are no longer ready to be told what to do and what to believe. And this is the moment and this is the argument of the paper. This is the key psychological crack in any dictatorial system that goes into the process of modernization. Of course, dictatorships, if I would write a Machiavellian, a prince recipe, I would say don't go into modernization, keep the population illiterate, poor, and disconnected, and then you will survive as a dictator forever. Because there will not be the critical potential in the population to come up to challenge you or to put you into question. But China and other countries think that humans are social or can be treated as social insects with a social credit system. And the idea of this modernization idea is the idea of a perfectly orchestrated society. The maximum achievement a society can have is that everyone is ordered into her or his place and it's controlled centrally from above. So actually, those totalitarian or neo-totalitarian ideas of the best society, the most powerful society, fascism was on the same line, communism was on the same line, and China now is on exactly that line, is perfect orchestration. And that means it's treating human nature as if we are social insects. And we're trying to make an argument this is not working. And the question was, can we show this with data from the World Value Survey? And I thought, or we think, we can. I'm switching to the cursor, it works. So the basic analytic idea was the following. So we have some form of education in every society. We ask this in the World Value Survey. So what is your highest achieved level on an ordinal scale, 9-point scale actually, from primary education to a university degree? What is your highest level of education? And then we have a variable which I think is sort of really depicting the core essence of modernization, emancipative values. How free people are in their thinking, how tolerant, how trustful, how in favor of gender equality, So the basic idea was to ask the question, how is it if modernization works in the way that the modernization theorists argued, meaning that people are becoming more self-confident, feeling more agency, feeling more empowered, and starting to think for themselves. They will not accept unconsented authority anymore, whether it's in politics or in business or wherever else in the family, even. So the role of the father as the patriarch will be questioned. The role of the dictator as the big leader of the country will be questioned. The role of the CEO in the company who gives just orders will be questioned. This is the basic idea of modernization theory, that it has psychological effects on human mindsets that make people less and less accepting authority that has not been asked for. Of course, even in democracies, we have authority. We lend authority to the parliament, to the prime minister, to the president, but it's consented authority and it's temporary. These are the two crucial limitations. Of course, authority must exist in order to make decisions in a society. But in democracy, it's consented and temporary, and it can be withdrawn. And yeah, so this is the basic idea. Now, there's an opposing idea. And this is, for me, it's a question of human nature. And finally, the question is, how much are we social insects? And the opposite idea is, and this has been formulated by Paul Snyderman in a book that he published in 1973 on personality and political regimes. He argued that every political regime that is in the possession of a functioning state apparatus. So we're not talking about warring states or anarchic situations, but any political system that is in the possession of a functioning state apparatus, including media, schools, education system, police, blah, 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 secret police. Any system that exists that is in the possession of those capacities will kind of inject into people's mind the values that are needed for that system to survive. And that means that that would mean that exposure to more education and what it does with people's mindset is completely regime contingent. It depends on the type of regime in which this happens. And it's not universal. There is no universal enlightenment effect that people are getting more emancipatory as they are exposed to more education, no matter what regime this is. No. Here, the argument is it depends completely on the regime in which people are exposed to education. And if they are exposed to more education in a more autocratic system, people getting more autocratic, authoritarian in their mindset, which in a multi-level scenario means that the effect of education on people's mindset, let's say emancipative values, will be moderated by the type of regime in which this happens. And if we think of autocracy, democracy, not as a dichotomy, but as a continuum with two extreme poles, and this is what the the horizontal axis in this theoretical figure tries to show. Very much to the left, there is no autocracy, and more much to the right, the country is more and more autocratic. So very much to the right, we would see China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, and other countries that come to mind. More to the left, we would see Switzerland, Sweden, Iceland, maybe a bit of Germany. So that's the idea. There's a continuum of autocracy versus democracy. And what we try to depict here, there's two alternative scenarios. If a country is more autocratic, more education means it actually suffocates emancipative values and turns them actually the other way around into more authoritarian thinking as people get more education, because the education is indoctrinated by the system, and the system wants to breed mindsets that believe into the system, and that means to believe into the authority of the leaders and be obedient followers, social insects in the end. So this is depicted by the reddish two lines. And the greenish two lines say, no, this is actually not happening. Um, every system that puts people into education makes them thinkers for themselves. Yeah. So and then we were following this idea a little bit further. So you see here this autocratic firewall number one. So modernizing autocracies have a very good chance to survive if they are able to disrupt the effect of educational achievement on emancipative values. If they are able to do that, then we are actually social insects, and then autocracies can modernize and survive with modernization and maybe even outperform the world's liberal democracies. If they are not capable to have this first firewall, the next questions are, okay, even if they cannot prevent people to become more emancipatory in their attitudes as the system continues to grow economically, more education, more urbanization, more occupational specialization, and so on and so forth, more communication. If they cannot prevent the emancipative values to arise, then there are three more firewalls that would make the idea of autocracies modernizing and surviving real, namely to prevent emancipative values to translate into democracy support. Because democracy support would mean people want an alternative system than the one in which they are living. So they should kind of be able to translate emancipative values into democracy support. They should also be able, this is the next firewall, that people who are stronger in emancipative values, they should not be critical of the system. Because this would be the other source of bottom-up emancipatory resurgence against the coercive nature of dictatorial systems. And then we should see number three, 2C, in this picture 2C, is that people who are stronger in emancipative values, they should not protest more or show more protest activity. I was actually surprised that no one ever took this up, because these are the psychological mechanisms that would guarantee autocratic survival in the face of systems that modernize. And we have the data on this. We have the data on this. We have data in the World Value Survey on educational achievement. We have data on emancipative values. We have data on democracy support. We have data on how critical or distrustful people are to the institutions of their country. And we have data on protest activity. And now what we do, we match those data with the data of VDEM, Varieties of Democracy project in Gothenburg, Sweden University. in cooperation with many universities in the United States. And they score countries on all kinds of indicators of how autocratic they are. And now we can look, how much do these firewalls work? Does a higher degree of autocracy work as a potent moderator of those four effects that we see here? And our first take on this is, here you see on the horizontal axis, this is very easy to understand. It shows how autocratic is a country. More to the right, the more autocratic it is. So the most point to the right would be North Korea for sure. The more to the left, the more democratic it is. So I didn't label the countries here because it becomes an unreadable graph. But you can imagine that on the left-hand side, the bubbles are Iceland, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, blah, blah. And on the right-hand side, you would see Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan and China and North Korea for sure. And you see there is a trend that the more autocratic a country is, the less does individuals' education that they received in a country translate into emancipative values. So it's a downward slope. But it is never, almost never, turning into the opposite direction. Meaning that as people get more education under autocracy, they're getting more autocratic in their mindset. There's just one bubble below the line, and that's Saudi Arabia, to tell you this. So you can conclude, yes, autocracy is a moderating variable in the sense that it makes the translation of education into an emancipatory mindset slower, but it does not sort of cut it off or put it into the opposite direction. So I think this is a very important insight. We also, in the next slide, and this is actually a brilliant exercise by Leonard Brunkart, one of our co-authors. Education character, what does it mean? VDEM has produced in the newest data release a variable that measures, of course, it's based on expert codings as much as we can rely on these data, but let's give it the credibility for the moment. It measures how much of indoctrination people have been exposed to when going through a systems education. And what they basically did is that they coded history books for sixth, seventh, or eighth graders in how heroic and rosy a country depicts its own history. And now Leonard put those data together, and we know from the World Value Survey for each of our 650,000 individuals that we have surveyed since 1981. We know from each of those individuals, when did they start their education, how old were they when they did the survey. So you can isolate a time span that people have been under the exposure of education, and then match this with those VDEM data. And then you can get for each individual a score of how much indoctrination you have been exposed to. And Leonard showed me this graph in the first time he did it, from minus 0.1 to plus 0.2, and it looked like a graph that is going like this, steeply down. And I said, sorry, this is not the information we want to see. please put the graph on the full theoretical scale of possibility. So from the possible maximum to the possible minimum, in order to see how flat the line is. It's super flat. It's very surprising. Meaning, autocracy, you see the line is slowly going down, meaning autocracy does work as a moderator. It moderates down the emancipatory effect of education, but very, very, very thinly. And that means the idea of autocratic modernization would work with social insects, but on the long term, not with human beings. And here's the thing, this I wanted to get together, and this is our challenge because we haven't figured out how to do it. What you see here is basically a regime survival analysis. Looking at the VDEM data from Gothenburg, who have scored every country in the world every year from 1900 to 2022. And then you measure levels of democracy on a scale from 0 to 1. And then you look at from 1 year to the next, from 1900 to 1901, from 1901 to 1902, from 1931 to 1932. And you look at how many instances of regime change or regime termination do you have. And if you look at 1 year intervals, which is the leftist kind of point on this graph, if you look at 1 year intervals, there is hardly anything happening. Because regimes are based on institutions and institutions are supposed to last. That means in every 1 year interval across the 200 independent nation states that we have in the world, you will see 99% of regime stability as compared to regimes that go down the drain. But it's a cosmic principle that everything is finite or terminal. And that means you just have to widen the time horizon in order to see more regime terminations or regime dying. And this is what you see. Therefore, the two curves are going up as we widen the time horizon. So the gray curve tells you, okay, if you go from 1 year intervals to 5, 10, 20, 30 years, so you see more regime terminations. But the crucial point is what this picture shows, democracies have a tremendous Darwinian selective survival advantage over autocracies. Because among those regime changes that are increasing in number, democratizations are outnumbering autocratizations, so episodes in the opposite direction by a huge factor. And our argument is that this is because of the psychological cracks in the autocratic model of society. And that is not good news for China or for Singapore or for Saudi Arabia for the future. Okay, so this is more or less the story of this paper. And as I said, it's work in progress, and we are thinking about more data collections like survey experiments, how we can filter out a bit more to zoom in, because this is a very like sort of a bird eyes picture, and we would like to go into more nuanced details on this. So much for that. Thanks for listening, and I'm curious about questions and criticisms.
Thank you very much, Professor Welzel, for this very interesting talk. And the floor is open now. We have about 10 minutes time for question and answers. Please either wave at me or raise your hand digitally or ask questions to Professor Welzel or comment. The floor is open now for the audience. Gustavo Miotti, yes? Please.
I thank you. I'm doing my PhD at Rollins College in the US, and I'm studying the effects of globalization and contact. One of the things that caught me attention in your study is that if you could compare with the numbers of free report in the last decade, we have seen an increase on autocracies and the reduction of countries becoming democratic. So how can you explain this in your research? Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Well, there's a huge debate going on also among political scientists. How dramatic is the democratic recession that we sure observe in the last, let's say, 15, maybe 20 years?
Mhm.
Some papers are now out that say like, okay, that actually it's overestimated. It's not that the world is not as bad as it looks, but it's also a bit of the drama effect. Bad news sells better. So more scholars, actually, I would say 90% of political scientists are now writing on democratic backsliding, because that's what everyone is now writing about, and how bad and dramatic the situation is. Some scholars now, there are a couple of papers out that also VDEM is a bit of a victim of this, because VDEM actually produces very good data, at least it is said, but it's all expert codings, and experts are not free from the zeitgeist, and people are, and there is a proof to this in a recent paper that people are coding things worse out of their subjective impressions. So this is one answer, but not the entire one. The other one is that I studied the trends on VDEM or with Polity or Freedom House. Democracy has been, over the last 120 years, been increasing and spreading around the world, but it was not always like just a straight line. It was with dips, so fluctuating. And I would definitely say we are currently in a down cycle. That's I think it's more, or is basically undeniable. But I would argue it's a cycle, and that this is not reversing the long-term trend. But okay, this is speculation. We will see. Um, I predicted with Engelhardt that in 2025 China will democratize. It doesn't happen, as far as it seems. But then again, if look at it's a funny story actually. In 1985, Huntington, one of the most famous political scientists of all times, wrote an article, will more countries become democratic? Question mark. And his answer in the conclusion was no, it's not going to happen. 6 years later, he publishes the third wave of democratization and explains why it was so predictable that most of the world, including Southern Europe, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, would become democratic. So this is the thing about the timing.
Thank you. Are you finished? Okay. There's a comment by Sarah Brioli in the chat. Sarah's asking, following the theme of Gustavo's comment, how would you explain a recent Ipsos finding that younger generations in open Western democracies are dubious about the feasibility of democracy despite their very open education? That's the question of Sarah.
Okay, I think this goes very much also in the direction of what Roberto Foa and Yasha Monk were publishing under the heading Democratic Deconsolidation. I think those findings are a bit, they need a deeper interpretation. Because first of all, we need to think about, are people judging what they see right now, what the state of democracy is in their countries. And if they are critical, you get these results, but not because people are turning their back to democracy and its principles, but because they have become more critical and I would say more emancipatory in their mindset that makes them more critical, and they're just judging the reality under sort of higher standards. And then the judgment turns out to be more negative. This could be one reason. Yeah, actually, this would be my main answer to this question.
Thank you, Chris. Do I see any other hands raised? Yes, Francesco Rigoli. Please go ahead, Francesco.
Thanks a lot for the talk. It was very interesting. I have a question about the concept of autocracy. I wonder whether one might break it down into slightly different concepts. For example, especially the way that autocracies style themselves. Some would present themselves as sort of like dictatorial systems with a sort of one strong man at the head of the system. Other autocracies present themselves as technocracy, if you will. So systems that are based on science, on capable administrative people, and so on. And perhaps at the end of the day, they remain autocracies, but the way they style themselves and the way they present themselves is very different. And I wonder whether, for example, thinking about Singapore, even China, and even Saudi Arabia to some extent, might lean towards this definition. And do you think that the concept of technocracy might be more appealing for people who support emancipatory values?
This is a very, very good point. We have not been digging into this, but this is on our, and it's now for sure on our task list to try to, disassemble a little bit. What is for sure true is that except for 2 or 3 countries in the world, all autocracies try to sell themselves, and my co-author Leonard Brunkert works a lot on this, and legitimization strategies try to sell themselves as democracies. Then they put an adjective in front of the noun democracy, like guided democracy, managed democracy, or whatever else. I think guided was from Suharto, Indonesia, the word that they used, and there is similarities in the narrative, namely to the effect that they say, okay, we are knowing what is in the best of people's interest, and therefore we are governing for the people. And that is democracy. That is real democracy. And then they say Western democracy is a liberal perversion, over liberal perversion, because they have abortion rights and stuff like this. And they try to depict themselves, we are real democracies. China speaks of itself as the greatest democracy, even though it's not true, because by population size, India is now larger. But you can even debate if India is still a democracy under Moody. And but there is, we call it sort of a guardianship narrative of democracy. So there is wise leaders in power, and because the leaders are wise, the people owe obedience because they govern in the best of people's interest. Guardianship. This is a guardianship narrative that almost all autocracies in the world are trying to sell to their people in order to make them believe that they live in a democracy. But you are right. It would be interesting in how far they distinguish themselves in their narratives in terms of how much is there a leadership cult or a technocracy. I think this is what you said. So they just do the best what science tells us and what should be the best for society, and therefore loyalty is owned to them. I think this is the Chinese version in some sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We have 3 minutes left. Marita Cavallo.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. It was really very, very interesting. I was thinking on the line of your talk that one example could be birth rates in China. I'm especially interested in how birth rates are coming down all over. And well, this comes to be now like a personal decision. And in China, first they were forced to have only one children, but then they were encouraged to have more and they want more children, but the Chinese people go their way and they don't have many children as before. Do you have any information regarding why birth rates came so down in many countries?
It's part of our actually part of our forthcoming book on the cool water effect. It's almost on the market right now, but just to tell you, it's a bit of propaganda, of course. It will be available open access, and you can download it chapter by chapter. Each one has its own DOI. But one aspect that we see, and it's extremely powerful, is the decline of birth rates paralleled by the increase of schooling rates. These two variables have a negative relationship since they were measured the first time, and it's always at like minus 0.8, minus 0.9, and it did not change. But in all countries, so we have 3 graphs in the book, you would see for the Western world, the 2 lines. So fertility rates, birth rates going down, schooling rates going up. And the crossing point was way back in the early 1940s. So basically after the Second World War. In the post-communist world, the crossing point was in the late 1980s. And we are still thinking of a paper that could be providing a predictive model that when the 2 lines cross each other, this is the most unstable moment for a society where a regime change might happen. And then for the global south, the 2 lines haven't crossed each other yet, but are predicted, if you just prolongate the lines, are predicted to cross each other in 2 or 3 years. And this is, we also have this, many people talk about multiple modernities. Every country modernizes in a different way. But these demographic trends are so uniform. It's incredible. It's like a force of nature. Different countries are just at different stages in this process, but it is happening. And it is making, and this is important for me also as a gender research scholar, this will bring women, girls into the driver's seat of our future development and make them change agents.
Thank you. Looking forward to your book, Chris.
Professor Olga Lutsenko, please.
Thank you very much for your thought-provoking works, all works. In light of your theory, I would like to come back to Europe and to pose the following question. To what extent can the recent rise of far-right movements in, for example, Germany, especially among the youth, while not a regime change itself, be interpreted as a profound psychological and cultural challenge to democratic modernity? That this phenomenon suggests that the cracks you identify in autocratic visions may also reflect tensions within democratic societies, particularly when modernization is perceived as threatening traditional or identity-based value systems?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, this question is, of course, a big one. And you can imagine I have to struggle a lot with it because I'm coming from a different angle. So, but this right-wing populism research, we had a recent paper on it. I'm going here more or less alongside with Pippa Norris and Ronald Inglehart, cultural backlash theory. For me, it's the most plausible explanation because I know from German science, German surveys that have been done, for instance, in the German social survey, Albus, and stuff like this, that let me put it a bit different. You often hear in the media that the right-wing kind of attitude has been increasing over the generations and over time. And this is just dead wrong. It has not been increasing. The potential of people who have an authoritarian mindset in Germany, I can say, has always been around between 15 and 20, maybe 25% since the end of the Second World War. This has not changed. What has changed is how capable candidates, political actors have been to mobilize this potential. And the big change here is social media. Before the social media became a prominent feature of our societies, the established media and established political parties had a gatekeeping monopoly and an agenda setting monopoly. And things that couldn't be said were not be said. And this has changed. And many, many people who belong into this, let's say, like right-wing camp were for years, actually decades, vanishing in the camp of non-voters. And this is also why we had like declining voter turnout. And now with the social media, they are mobilized back to the ballot. So it's not a public opinion change. It's a change in the supply side structure with the oncoming of the social media that has changed the situation completely.
Capacity to mobilize these social political.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I fully agree with Professor Welzel. Regarding Austria, we have the same. We had 30% for Jörg Haider, FPÖ, in the 90s. So the maximum of the potential of these people is about 30%. And if they are not, most of them are non-voters. If you ask them about voting, you say, for 20 years I did not vote, but now I was voting. So you have this 30% in Germany and Austria always. So there's no increase, it's just potential which can be mobilized or not. So I fully agree with him that we have this very same in Austria since the Second World War. About 10% of anti-Semites, 10% of anti-regime, and 10% protests. So, but they don't go beyond 30%. So this is some sort of glass ceiling for these people. But now, I agree with him also with the social media, they can mobilize having alternative media and ignoring the state media and building their own cosmos for the right-wing policies. Thank you. So, is there any other final? We lost some time during the break, so we can have another question. But if there's no question, we can conclude.
I'm good for further questions. So
Okay.
fine.
Thank you, Chris. Is there any other?
Yeah.
Yes, please, Dr. Saltanova.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to come here again and to hear this from you directly. I wanted to ask if you as well take a look at the need to become adult and this notion of old children, of the people who are becoming older but are not engaged into the civic movements, into democratic practices, and who specifically sometimes are not taking responsibilities and want to put the responsibilities on somebody else's shoulders, as a potential hypothesis to why people choose to vote for undemocratic candidates who come with a strong agenda. We know it all. I will make peace in 2 days, in 24 hours, in 50 days, whatever. Is there a specific correlation with the immaturity of people on a massive scale? Obviously, not the social activists and so on.
I wish you to send me this by email. Um, um, Especially the topic of immaturity. I just can tell you one thing. I was sitting on one of the APSR receptions with Fording and Schramm, who did a book on the rise of the alt-right in the United States. And we had a nice talk over a glass of wine, and he was then telling me, it was Schramm, that they have developed a psychological scale that would exactly go into this topic of immaturity, the word you just used. And it was cognitive, they call it, it's a technical term, they call it a scale of cognitive need. And what the scale is measuring is how much people base their decisions that they make in their life. And this can be anything from buying a house to a car, or mating, or deciding on whom to propose marriage, how much they just do it out of their gut feelings and don't need a process of sitting down with a sheet of paper and making 2 columns, pros and cons, or if people exactly need the latter. And those people score very high on cognitive need, and the others scoring low. And then you can imagine that they did this with Republican and Democrat voters in the United States. And Republican voters, especially those who vote for Trump, are notoriously low on cognitive need. And this is a sad thing because it also means these are people who do not need fact checking. That means that the populists like Trump get away all the time, even with their lies. Because if your supporters have low cognitive need, they don't double check. And if you lie to them, you lie to them, and you get away with it. And you the next time you tell something else. And this is the same phenomenon with peace in Poland, with Orban in Hungary, and with all the others. They get away with their non-performance also. You can actually go, it's very interesting to look at AfD protocols where there are in German parliaments, almost now everywhere, what the quality of their input is when they do a parliamentary question or something like this. It's a malperformance.
Because it is really correlates with your previous talk you gave in this lounge, when there is a huge correlation between the tertiary education and the better choices, more democratic choices, more secular choices. So I really wanted to see if maybe there is also this kind of a third graph in the in your WVS picture here, not only secular choices or traditional choices, but also the informed or common sense, or as you said, cognitive need correlation there. I'm speaking again as a Ukrainian here, and we're seeing the rise of the what we call emergency maturing, when we had to become much more adult because of the war, to take care of the kids, to take care of education, to take care of bombing, to take care of people, helping people, volunteering people. So there is a huge boost of agency, but there is also this really scary feeling of being the only adult in the room, where people or nations who we thought to be much more adult, mature, not necessarily respond in the same way. While, for example, the smaller nations like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, for example, are much more somehow relatable to this. So is this only the question of historical closeness to Russia and being threatened by them? Or is there this kind of cognitive need, maturity, connected with democratization process directly? So that would be my biggest interest. Thank you so much.
A very interesting topic. I made a couple of notes. I will think about it. I think there's a lot of potential, what you just mentioned, to explore. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Do I see any other hands? Oh, we are way above our time anyway, but I thank Professor Wetzel that he spends all this time in addition to our planned 1 hour. There was something from... Oh, that's the email address. Okay, then in that case, I would like to thank Professor Wetzel for his fantastic talk, and I would like to thank the audience for all their questions and interventions. I think it was very successful despite the short technical break. And the talk of Professor Wetzel will be on the YouTube channel of the WVS survey, and you can listen to the whole thing, including your questions, online after this event. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much to all of you. It was very interesting, and I wish you a great day. And as I said, you can see it again on YouTube in peace and quiet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Goodbye.
attending.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.